What if everything you've been chasing, the promotion, the relationship, the number on the scale, the approval of people who barely think about you, what if none of it was ever the real problem? What if I told you that the single most defining relationship of your entire existence isn't with your spouse, your parents, your best friend, or even your God, but with the person you see in the mirror every single morning? And what if I told you that most people in America right now, most people everywhere, are in a quietly abusive relationship with that very person? Here's what nobody says out loud. You can have the dream job, the loving partner, the Instagram-worthy life, and still feel completely hollow inside. You can be surrounded by people who love you and still feel utterly alone because the one person whose love you actually need hasn't shown up yet. That person is you. This isn't a book about bubble baths and vision boards. This isn't about repeating "I am worthy" into a mirror until you believe it. This is about something far more radical, far more transformative, and far more urgent than anything the self-help industry has ever sold you. This is about becoming your own most trusted guardian, your own most reliable source of approval, courage, and belonging. Because here's the brutal, uncomfortable, life-changing truth. If you don't learn to love yourself first, every other love in your life will always feel like it's not quite enough. By the time you finish this book, you won't just understand why self-love matters. You'll understand the neuroscience behind it, the childhood wiring that destroyed it, and the precise psychological tools to rebuild it, permanently. This is the most important work you will ever do, and it starts right now. The silent crisis living inside. 85% of Americans, let's start with a number that should shake you. Research consistently shows that more than 85% of people struggle with low self-worth. That's not a minority. That's not a fringe group. That's the vast majority of the human beings walking through grocery stores, sitting in traffic, scrolling through their phones at 2 a.m., all of them quietly, privately, fundamentally rejecting who they are. They don't like themselves. They don't trust themselves. And they certainly don't love themselves. But here's the part that's even harder to swallow. Most of them have no idea this is the real issue. They think the problem is their job, their relationship, their financial situation, their past. They spend years, sometimes entire lifetimes, trying to fix every external variable while completely ignoring the one internal foundation that determines everything else. Imagine you hired a contractor to renovate your dream home. New floors, new paint, new furniture, everything beautiful on the surface, but nobody bothered to check the foundation. The walls are cracking because the ground beneath the house is unstable. Every renovation you pour money and hope into eventually crumbles. That's what it looks like to chase external solutions to an internal problem. Now, let me ask you something uncomfortable. Think about the voice in your head, the one that narrates your life, the one that reacts when you make a mistake, when you look in the mirror, when you get rejected, when you try something new and fail. What does that voice sound like? For most people, that voice is vicious. It says things that would end friendships if spoken out loud. It reminds you of mistakes from a decade ago. It compares you to everyone around you and always finds you lacking. It whispers that you're too much or not enough, or both at the same time. Now ask yourself, would you let a friend speak to you that way? Would you let a partner, a coworker, a stranger on the street speak to you that way? Of course not. You'd walk away. You'd cut them off. And yet, you let that voice live rent-free inside your head, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That internal relationship between you and the voice that narrates your life is the most important relationship you will ever have. And for most people, it's the most dysfunctional one. When that relationship is broken, everything else breaks with it. You accept jobs that don't honor your intelligence because deep down you don't believe you deserve better. You stay in relationships that quietly diminish you because a part of you has decided that this is what you're worth. You shrink yourself in rooms full of people because you're terrified of being truly seen, because somewhere along the way you decided that the real you isn't someone worth seeing. The consequences are everywhere, hiding in plain sight. The person who can't make a decision without calling 3 people first. That's not indecisiveness. That's a person who doesn't trust themselves. The high achiever who's never satisfied, who hits one goal and immediately moves the target. That's not ambition. That's someone trying to earn the right to feel worthy. The people pleaser who says yes when every cell in their body is screaming no. That's not kindness. That's fear wearing a generous mask. Neuroscience has confirmed what many of us feel but can't name. People with low self-worth have chronically overactive threat detection systems in the brain. Their amygdala, the brain's alarm center, is essentially stuck on high alert, scanning for rejection and criticism in every room, every glance, every silence. This isn't paranoia. It's a nervous system that learned early in life that the world isn't safe for the real you. And in that state, that constant low-grade panic, you can't create. You can't take risks. You can't love freely. You can't live fully. But here's what this book exists to tell you. None of this is permanent. The patterns that are keeping you small are not who you are. They are programs installed without your consent, running on autopilot. And programs can be rewritten. The first step is understanding what went wrong, not to assign blame, not to reopen wounds, but because you cannot heal what you refuse to look at. Self-love isn't a luxury. It isn't arrogance. It isn't selfishness. It is the single most practical, powerful, and transformative skill a human being can develop. And the fact that nobody taught it to you in school, in church, or around the dinner table is one of the great injustices of modern life. But you're here now, and that matters. What's actually happening in your brain when you reject yourself? Let's get scientific for a moment, because understanding why this works the way it does will change how you think about every harsh thought you've ever directed at yourself. Your brain is not neutral. It is not an objective recorder of reality. It is an incredibly sophisticated prediction machine, constantly running simulations based on past experience, and it shapes what you see, what you notice, and what you believe is possible, based almost entirely on how you've learned to relate to yourself. Here's what the neuroscience actually shows. When you think positively about yourself, when you offer yourself genuine appreciation, encouragement, or compassion, your brain's reward centers activate. Dopamine and serotonin flood your system. These aren't just feel-good chemicals. They are the neurological foundation of motivation, resilience, creativity, and clear thinking. But when you engage in self-criticism, when you attack yourself for a mistake, compare yourself unfavorably to others, or replay moments of failure or shame, your brain activates the same neural regions that process physical pain, not metaphorically, literally. Brain imaging studies show that the sting of harsh self-judgment lights up the same areas as getting punched in the stomach. That's why people describe emotional wounds in physical terms: heartbroken, gutted, crushed. Your brain isn't exaggerating. It actually hurts. And there's more. When your brain interprets self-attack as a threat, because it does, your body triggers a full stress response. Cortisol floods your bloodstream. Your heart rate elevates. Your immune system suppresses. Your higher cognitive functions, creativity, strategic thinking, emotional regulation, go offline. You become reactive, impulsive, and narrow in your thinking. Your body genuinely cannot tell the difference between being chased by a threat in the wild and being attacked by your own inner critic. This is why chronic self-criticism doesn't just feel terrible. It is actively destroying your health, your cognition, and your capacity for joy. Now let's look at the other side. Dr. Kristen Neff's pioneering research at the University of Texas has shown that people who practice self-compassion, who treat themselves with the same warmth and understanding they'd extend to someone they care about, show measurably lower cortisol levels, stronger immune function, greater emotional resilience, and higher heart rate variability. That last one matters because it's one of the most reliable biological markers of your capacity to handle stress without breaking. Self-compassion doesn't just make you feel better, it makes you function better at every level. Here's where it gets truly fascinating. Your brain has what's called neuroplasticity, the scientifically confirmed ability to physically rewire itself based on repeated experience. Every thought you think, every habit you practice, every emotional pattern you repeat is literally carving neural pathways in your brain, like water carving channels in stone. This means two things that should give you real hope. First, the patterns of self-rejection you've been living with are not fixed. They are pathways that were carved through repetition, and they can be replaced through new repetition. Second, every single time you choose to respond to yourself with kindness rather than criticism, even in small moments, even when it feels fake or forced, you are physically building new neural architecture. You are constructing new channels in the stone. The brain has a network called the default mode network, the mental background noise that runs when you're not focused on a task. In people with low self-worth, this network becomes a machine that generates a constant loop of self-critical thought. Neuroscience has shown that mindfulness practices, consistent, repeatable acts of self-aware attention, can alter this network, quieting the loop and replacing it with something far more generous. Your brain also releases oxytocin, commonly called the bonding or love hormone, not only when you connect with other people, but when you treat yourself with genuine compassion. When you comfort yourself during a hard moment, your brain responds as if you are receiving care from someone who loves you, because at a neurological level, you are. Self-love is not just emotionally wise. It is biologically necessary. It is the chemical environment your brain needs to perform at its highest level, and perhaps most powerfully, the amygdala, your brain's threat detector, becomes measurably less reactive in people who practice sustained self-compassion. You stop seeing danger where none exists. You stop taking every perceived slight as confirmation of your unworthiness. You gain access to the calm, clear-eyed perspective that good decisions are made from. Understanding this isn't just interesting, it's liberating, because it means the suffering you've been carrying isn't a character flaw, it's a neurological pattern. And patterns can change. How the first 10 years of your life taught you to reject yourself. Every single human being on this planet was born knowing how to love themselves. Watch a 2-year-old. Watch the way they demand to be held, fed, and heard without a shred of apology. Watch the way they dance without caring how they look. The way they cry without shame, laugh without restraint, and take up space as if the entire universe exists for their benefit, because at that age, it basically does. That's not selfishness. That's the factory setting. That is the original state of the human self. Deserving, expressive, fully alive. So what happens? Somewhere between that 2-year-old in full bloom and the adult reading these words, something shifts. The dancing stops. The demands get quieted. The expressive, demanding, wholly alive child learns, through 1,000 small lessons delivered by people who loved them but were themselves wounded, that not all of who they are, is welcome. Your earliest caregivers didn't sit you down and say, "We're going to teach you to reject yourself now." It never works like that. It happens in the accumulation of ordinary moments. The parent who responded to achievement with warmth and to failure with silence, teaching you, without a single word, that your worth is tied to your performance. The household where crying was treated as inconvenient, where big emotions were met with, "Stop being so dramatic," teaching you that your inner world was a burden to others. The classroom where being different meant being targeted, where conforming meant surviving, teaching you that safety requires hiding. The culture that told little boys that sensitivity was weakness and little girls that anger was unbecoming, installing divisions inside people that would take decades to heal. These aren't failures of character, they're failures of transmission. Your parents couldn't give you what they hadn't received. Their parents couldn't give them what they hadn't received. The wound is generational, and in most American families, regardless of income, zip code, or religion, some version of this story has been playing out for generations. Dr. Gabor Mate, one of the world's leading researchers on childhood trauma and adult behavior, describes this as the authentic self-wound, the gap between who you actually are and who you learned you needed to be in order to receive love. To survive emotionally, you became a strategist. You learned which parts of yourself were safe to show and which parts needed to be hidden, managed, or eliminated. The kid who was too sensitive learned to perform toughness. The kid who was too loud learned to make herself small. The kid who was deeply creative but raised in a practical household learned to call his own gifts impractical. The kid who had enormous needs in a family that was barely holding together learned to pretend she had no needs at all. These strategies were brilliant. They were adaptive. They kept you connected to the people you depended on for survival. In the context of your childhood, they may have been exactly right. But here's the tragedy. Those strategies don't get automatically updated when you become an adult. They keep running. The child who learned that love had to be earned still shows up in your relationships, working desperately to prove your worth to people who never asked you to prove anything. The child who learned that emotions were dangerous still lives in your body, holding tension where grief wants to flow, building walls where intimacy wants to enter. And the inner critic, that relentless, merciless voice, is almost always a direct inheritance. It sounds like someone, a parent with high expectations, a teacher who used shame as a teaching tool, a sibling who was always measuring, a culture that told you exactly how much you were allowed to weigh, earn, feel, and want. That voice found its way inside and went on autopilot, and now it runs in the background of your life like a program you never installed on purpose and never learned to shut down. Here's what's essential to understand. This is not your fault. The self-rejection you carry is not evidence of a broken character. It is evidence of an adaptive mind that did what it needed to do to keep you safe. You are not the problem. The programming is the problem. And programming, as we now know from neuroscience, can be changed. The question is not whether you are capable of writing a new story. You are. The question is whether you are willing to do the work. Not because it's easy, but because the cost of not doing it, another decade lived from fear, from smallness, from a quiet sense of never being quite enough, is far greater than the discomfort of changing. You were not born rejecting yourself. You were taught to. And anything that was taught can be unlearned. Breaking the most addictive drug America never talks about, there is an addiction epidemic in America that nobody is naming properly. It's not opioids, it's not alcohol, it's not social media, though social media has weaponized it to a degree that previous generations could never have imagined. It's the addiction to external validation, and it is everywhere. It is in the person who cannot order off a menu without asking everyone at the table what they're getting. It is in the professional who has achieved more than they ever dreamed, but still refreshes their inbox at midnight, waiting for someone to confirm they did a good job. It is in the teenager who has uploaded 63 photos this month, but only feels okay about herself on the days when the likes come quickly enough. It is in you. It is in me. It is in almost every American adult walking around with an invisible hunger that no amount of external feeding has ever satisfied. Here's how the addiction works. Early in life, when your sense of self was forming, you discovered that approval from others felt like safety. When your parents praised you, you felt connected, worthy, protected. When they withheld approval, when they were disappointed, angry, or absent, it felt like a threat to your very survival. Because for a child, emotionally speaking, it was. Your brain wired that equation permanently. Approval equals safety. And then it spent the rest of your life trying to collect enough safety to feel okay. The tragedy is that it never works. Not for long. This is what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill effect. Each dose of external validation provides a temporary lift. Your brain gets its hit of dopamine. You feel good for an hour, a day, maybe a week. And then the feeling fades, your baseline returns, and you need another hit. The treadmill keeps moving. You keep running. You never arrive anywhere. Meanwhile, the cost is staggering, because in the pursuit of approval, you start making your decisions based on other people's comfort rather than your own truth. You take the career path that sounds impressive at Thanksgiving dinner rather than the one that lights you up at 6 a.m. You stay in relationships that look good from the outside long after they've stopped feeling good from the inside. You suppress opinions, shrink ambitions, edit your personality, all to avoid the terrifying possibility that someone might not like what they see. You trade your authentic life for a curated performance. And then you wonder why, despite all the applause, you still feel hollow. Social media has turned this ancient human vulnerability into a precision-engineered addiction. Every platform is designed by some of the most brilliant minds in Silicon Valley, using the same psychological principles employed in slot machines to hijack your validation-seeking brain. The infinite scroll, the variable reward of likes and comments, the perfectly calibrated notification system. These aren't accidents. They are intentional designs built around your deepest psychological needs. You are not weak for getting pulled in. You are human. But you deserve to understand what's happening so you can make conscious choices rather than compulsive ones. Here is the fundamental problem with external validation. It is structurally unstable. Other people's opinions of you are not about you. They are about them, their moods, their insecurities, their histories, their needs on any given day. Building your sense of worth on their shifting perceptions is like trying to build a skyscraper on sand. The person who loved your confidence last year may find it threatening today. The boss who praised your work under the last project may dismiss it under a new deadline. The social media audience that celebrated your vulnerability may punish it tomorrow. None of this reflects your actual value. All of it reflects the unstable nature of other people's inner worlds. And yet, when your self-worth lives outside of you, every fluctuation in that approval feels like a verdict on who you are. The path out of this addiction doesn't begin with willpower. It begins with understanding. You cannot stop chasing approval by simply deciding to stop. You need to build something on the inside that makes the outside chase unnecessary. That something is called internal validation, the radical countercultural practice of being your own source of approval, recognition, and encouragement. This doesn't mean you stop caring what others think entirely. That would be its own kind of dysfunction. It means you shift the primary source of your worth from external to internal. It means that when someone criticizes you, you can hear their perspective without having your identity dismantled. It means that when your work goes unacknowledged, you can acknowledge it yourself and mean it. It means that the question guiding your decisions shifts, slowly and surely, from what will people think to what do I actually believe is right. That shift is not dramatic, it is incremental. But every step in that direction is a step toward genuine freedom, and genuine freedom is the foundation on which genuine self-love is built. The 4 pillars of unshakable self-love. You now understand the problem. You understand where it comes from, how it operates in your brain, and how it's been reinforced by every part of the world around you. Now it's time to build something in its place, not a mood, not a phase, not a practice you do when you feel like it. A foundation. Self-love, real, durable, unshakable self-love, rests on 4 interconnected pillars. These are not metaphors. They are practical psychological structures, each one doing specific work, each one supporting and strengthening the others. Remove one, and the whole structure becomes unstable. Build all 4 with consistency and intention, and you become, quite literally, a different person. The first pillar, self-awareness. You cannot love what you do not know. This sounds obvious, but the truth is that most people are startlingly unfamiliar with themselves. They operate on autopilot, reacting to life from unconscious programs, driven by patterns they've never examined, shaped by beliefs they've never chosen. Self-awareness is the practice of becoming genuinely curious about your own inner life, not judgmental, not critical, curious. Like a compassionate investigator who actually wants to understand what's happening inside. Start with your internal dialogue. For 1 full day, pay attention to the tone and content of the voice in your head. What does it say when you make a mistake? When you succeed? When you walk into a room full of strangers? When you look in the mirror? Most people are genuinely shocked when they consciously tune in, because the voice is often far harsher than they'd realized, running on a loop of commentary they've simply stopped noticing. Then expand outward. Pay attention to your emotional patterns, what triggers them, how they move through your body, what behaviors they drive. Pay attention to your relational patterns, who you're drawn to and why, what roles you tend to play, what dynamics keep repeating. Pay attention to the gap between the life you want and the choices you're actually making. Self-awareness is not about becoming endlessly self-focused. It's about developing enough clarity about your own inner landscape to navigate it consciously, rather than being driven by forces you can't see. The second pillar, self-acceptance. Here is where most people hit resistance. Self-acceptance does not mean giving up on growth. It does not mean deciding your flaws are fine and you'll never change. It means something both simpler and more radical. It means meeting yourself exactly where you are, right now, without conditions. Not the version of you who's lost the weight, not the version of you who's finally gotten your act together, not the version of you who's healed from everything that hurt you. This version, the one reading this sentence, carrying every contradiction and imperfection and half-finished chapter of your story. That person deserves love, not eventually, now. True self-acceptance includes your shadows, the jealousy you're ashamed of, the anger you try to suppress, the fears you hide from everyone including yourself. Here's the counterintuitive truth. The parts of yourself you reject don't go away. They go underground. And underground, without light or acknowledgement, they grow more powerful, showing up in your behavior in ways you can't predict or control. When you accept something, when you say, "Yes, this is part of me too," it loses its grip on you. You can work with it consciously instead of being controlled by it unconsciously. Try this. Stand in front of a mirror, not to evaluate yourself, not to fix anything, and say, "I accept myself exactly as I am right now." Notice the resistance. Notice which parts of you feel hardest to include in that statement. Those are the parts that need the most love, not the most fixing, the most love. The third pillar, self-compassion. Self-compassion is the antidote to the inner critic, and it is perhaps the most misunderstood of the four pillars. Many high achievers resist the idea of self-compassion because they believe their inner critic is what drives them. They've built their success on self-pressure and self-punishment, and they're afraid that without those tools, they'll lose their edge. But the research is clear and unambiguous. Self-criticism undermines performance, while self-compassion enhances it. People who treat themselves with genuine kindness have greater motivation, more creative problem-solving ability, stronger resilience after failure, and, crucially, more authentic courage in the face of risk. The inner critic doesn't make you better, it makes you smaller, more fearful, and less capable of the bold, creative action that meaningful achievement actually requires. Self-compassion means treating yourself the way you would treat a genuinely good friend who is struggling, not with empty reassurance, but with honest, warm, caring acknowledgement of both the difficulty and the capacity to move through it. A tool worth using. When you're in the middle of a hard moment, when you've made a mistake, when you're overwhelmed, when you're hurting, place your hand on your heart. Notice the warmth. Say to yourself, "This is hard. This is a hard moment. And hard moments are part of every human life. I'm allowed to be struggling right now. I'm allowed to be kind to myself. This is not weakness. This is neurological intelligence." The fourth pillar, self-care. Real self-care has been buried under a mountain of commodity marketing. It is not the luxury skincare routine or the weekend getaway, though those things have their place. Real self-care is the daily, disciplined practice of honoring your own needs. It's the boundary you set with the colleague who drains your energy. It's the conversation you have with yourself every morning, asking, "What do I actually need today?" It's choosing sleep over another hour of numbing scrolling. It's pursuing therapy not as a crisis measure, but as maintenance for your most important asset, your mind. It's physical, nourishing your body with food that supports it, moving in ways that honor it, resting when it asks you to. It's emotional, processing feelings rather than suppressing them, expressing honestly rather than performing fine, creating space for joy rather than treating it as a reward you haven't yet earned. It's mental, protecting your attention from the constant assault of anxiety-producing content, feeding your mind with ideas and perspectives that expand rather than diminish you. And it is spiritual, in whatever form that word carries meaning for you. Connecting with something larger than your immediate circumstances, finding meaning, experiencing awe. These four pillars are not separate practices. They are a system. Each one makes the others more possible. Your self-awareness tells you where you need more acceptance. Your acceptance creates the safety for honest self-compassion. Your self-compassion gives you the emotional resource to actually care for yourself rather than punish yourself. And your self-care creates the physical and emotional clarity from which self-awareness deepens. Build all four consistently, and you will find that the ground beneath your life becomes solid in a way it has never been before. Silencing the critic that has lived in your head for decades, the inner critic is not your conscience. It is not your wisdom. It is not your instinct for self-improvement. It is a squatter, an uninvited tenant who moved into your mind during your most vulnerable years, claimed the most valuable real estate in your head, and has been renovating it to suit its own needs ever since. And until you understand exactly what it is and how it operates, it will continue to run your life from behind the scenes. The inner critic is a composite voice, assembled from the fragments of real voices that shaped your early years, the parent who held you to impossible standards, the teacher who used public shame as a disciplinary tool, the older sibling who always had a sharper edge, the culture that decided your worth was negotiable based on your appearance, your achievements, or your ability to fit in. These voices found their way inside, and then, because the brain is extraordinarily efficient, they automated. They became a program that ran without your supervision, updated their scripts to include new fears and new failures as you collected them, and convinced you that their commentary was simply the truth. It isn't. The inner critic operates through a set of cognitive distortions, predictable patterns of irrational thinking that feel completely rational from the inside, all-or-nothing thinking. One imperfect presentation means you're a fraud. One difficult relationship means you're unlovable. One missed workout means your health is ruined. Catastrophizing. The small mistake at work becomes the story of how you'll be fired. The awkward conversation becomes evidence that no one actually likes you. The health symptom becomes the worst-case diagnosis. Mind reading. Without a shred of evidence, the critic tells you what everyone in the room is thinking about you. And it's never generous. Personalization. Everything bad that happens is somehow connected to your essential inadequacy. The traffic, the rejection, the missed opportunity. All of it somehow your fault. These distortions feel like reality because they're generated by a voice that has had decades of access to your deepest fears and most painful memories. It knows exactly where to press. It has been studying you your entire life. But here's what breaks its power: recognition. The moment you can see the critic as a voice rather than the truth, the moment you create even the smallest sliver of distance between you and its commentary, it begins to lose its grip. Start by naming it, not to befriend it, but to defamiliarize it. Many people call it the committee, or give it an absurd name, anything that makes it less authoritative and more observable. The goal is to make it clear that this voice is talking to you, not talking as you. Then practice examining its claims like a skeptical attorney rather than a helpless defendant. When the critic says you'll never be able to do this, ask, what is the actual evidence for that? When it predicts catastrophe, ask, what is the realistic probability of that outcome? When it compares you to someone else, ask, what am I not seeing about their struggles? Most of the critic's claims don't survive this kind of scrutiny. They are built for emotional impact, not factual accuracy. And when you begin examining them rather than absorbing them, they start to crumble. Develop a counter voice, not a cheering section that lies to you with positivity, but a genuinely compassionate inner ally that speaks to you the way a wise, caring friend would. Not, you're amazing and everything is fine, but this is hard. You're doing your best, and that matters. Not you never fail, but you failed before and recovered before, and you can do it again. This is not toxic positivity. This is realistic compassion, the kind that actually builds the neural architecture of genuine confidence. Set limits with the critic the same way you would with a toxic person in your life. When it starts its familiar litany, you are allowed to say, internally, firmly, with authority, I've heard this before and I'm not engaging with it. You are allowed to redirect your attention. You are allowed to choose a different channel. This takes practice. The critic has had decades of uncontested airtime. You are not going to silence it in a week. But with consistency, with the daily, repeated choice to respond to yourself with honesty and kindness rather than harshness, you will watch it grow quieter. The space it occupied will become available for something far more useful, your own clear, warm, intelligent voice, the one that was always there, underneath the noise, waiting for you to stop mistaking someone else's fear for your own truth. Making peace. With every feeling you've ever been told to hide, there is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from doing too much, but from feeling too much, while pretending you're feeling nothing at all. If you grew up in America, or anywhere shaped by its cultural inheritance, there's a good chance you received very specific instructions about which emotions were acceptable and which ones needed to be managed, hidden, or eliminated. Boys were told that sadness and fear were signs of weakness, while anger was permitted in controlled doses as long as it served productivity. Girls were told that anger was unbecoming, that ambition was aggressive, that the appropriate emotional register was pleasant, accommodating, and fine, always fine. Everyone was told that vulnerability was a liability, that struggles should be private, that certain feelings were problems to be solved rather than experiences to be lived. These instructions didn't come from cruelty. They came from people who'd received the same instructions, who genuinely believed they were preparing you for a world that would be harder on you if you showed up soft. In their own way, they were trying to help. But the consequence, compounded over years and generations, is a culture of people who are strangers to their own inner lives, people who have suppressed, intellectualized, or numbed their way through feelings that were never meant to be escaped, people whose bodies are storing decades of unprocessed emotional experience as tension, inflammation, anxiety, and disconnection. Here's the truth that the science confirms and that your body already knows. Emotions are not problems. They are information. Every single feeling, including the ones you've been taught to be ashamed of, is a messenger carrying data about your needs, your boundaries, your values, and your state. Anger is not a character flaw. It is your nervous system's signal that something important to you is being threatened or violated. The question isn't how to eliminate your anger, it's how to listen to what it's telling you. Grief is not weakness. It is the price of having loved something, and honoring it with your feeling is one of the most dignified things a human being can do. Fear is not failure. It is your brain's attempt to protect you, however imperfectly calibrated that attempt might be. Even jealousy and shame, the emotions people are most determined to deny, carry information. Jealousy tells you something about what you genuinely want. Shame tells you about the gap between who you are and who you believe you should be, which is information worth examining, even if the emotion itself is painful. The practice of emotional mastery does not mean controlling your feelings. It means developing a mature, honest, compassionate relationship with your entire emotional range. The first skill is emotional awareness, the simple but surprisingly rare practice of actually noticing what you're feeling in real time rather than operating on autopilot. Multiple times throughout your day, pause and ask, what am I actually feeling right now? Not what should I be feeling or what am I trying not to feel, but what is actually present. You may notice that you have a very limited emotional vocabulary. Many people can name 3 emotions: good, bad, and fine. Developing the language to name what you're experiencing with more precision, frustrated rather than just bad, lonely rather than just sad, overwhelmed rather than just stressed, dramatically increases your ability to understand and work with what you're carrying. Pay attention to your body. Emotions are not just thoughts, they are physical events. Anxiety lives in your chest and your jaw. Grief settles in your throat and behind your eyes. Excitement tingles down your arms. Shame drops like a stone through your stomach. Learning your body's emotional language is an act of deep self-knowledge, and it is something no one can take from you. The second skill is emotional allowance, learning to let feelings be present without immediately trying to fix, escape, or solve them. American culture is deeply uncomfortable with discomfort. We have an entire industry dedicated to the premise that you should never feel bad for more than the time it takes to order something online. We medicate, distract, binge, scroll, drink, and overwork our way through experiences that were never meant to be avoided. Here is what the avoidance costs you. Emotions that are not allowed to complete their natural cycle don't disappear. They get stored in your body and your unconscious, and they keep showing up, louder, more insistent, wearing stranger disguises, until they are finally acknowledged. Sit with the feeling, even for just a few minutes. Don't judge it, don't explain it away, don't fix it. Just let it be there, the way you'd let a guest sit down before deciding whether they're welcome. The third skill is emotional expression, finding healthy, appropriate, conscious ways to let feelings move through you rather than staying stuck inside. This might mean journaling, not editing yourself, just writing whatever is true. It might mean physical movement, because the body is the original emotional processing system, and movement releases what thinking alone cannot. It might mean honest conversation with someone who has earned the right to hear your truth. It might mean creative expression, music, art, writing, through which something that has no words finds a voice anyway. Emotional self-love means ending the war against your own inner life. It means becoming someone who can sit with the full range of human feeling. Not because you're beyond being hurt, but because you trust yourself to move through hurt without being destroyed by it. That trust is built one honest feeling at a time. How loving yourself changes every relationship you'll ever have. If you want to understand the quality of someone's relationships, not just their romantic relationships, but every relationship in their life, look at how they talk to themselves when no one is watching. Because the relationship you have with yourself is not separate from your relationships with others. It is the template for them. It is the instruction manual your mind follows when deciding what treatment feels normal, what feels threatening, what feels like love, and what feels like too much to ask for. When you reject yourself internally, you unconsciously organize your external world to confirm that rejection. You attract people who criticize you because criticism feels familiar. You stay in relationships that don't honor you because a part of you has decided that this is the level at which you operate. You give more than you receive because giving feels justified while receiving feels dangerous, like you might be exposed as someone who doesn't quite deserve it. This isn't cynicism, this is psychology. And it is reversible. When you begin genuinely loving yourself, your relationships don't just improve marginally, they transform at their foundation. The first transformation is in what you tolerate. When your sense of worth is grounded internally, when it doesn't depend on this particular relationship continuing, you can see clearly when a dynamic isn't working. You can name it, you can address it, and if necessary, you can leave it without collapsing, because your identity isn't contained in the relationship. You have somewhere to stand that doesn't require another person's permission. People who lack self-love often stay far too long in situations that are diminishing them, not because they don't know better, but because the fear of losing the relationship feels more threatening than the cost of staying in it. Every day spent in that calculation is a day you've chosen someone else's comfort over your own well-being. Self-love changes the math. The second transformation is in what you attract. This isn't mystical, it's behavioral. When you love yourself, you carry yourself differently. You speak with more directness. You laugh more easily. You don't spend conversational energy managing other people's perceptions of you. This creates a magnetic quality, not because you've performed confidence, but because you're actually comfortable in your own skin. And people who are comfortable in themselves are drawn to others who are too. Meanwhile, you become naturally less appealing to people whose connection style depends on your insecurity. People who need you to feel small so they can feel big, they don't get the same traction anymore. The dynamic they were exploiting isn't available. The third transformation is in your capacity for genuine intimacy. Real intimacy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires that you feel safe enough with yourself to be seen without armor. When your inner environment is one of constant self-attack, showing yourself to another person feels too dangerous because their potential criticism or rejection would simply pile onto an existing wound. But when you love yourself, the calculation shifts. Even if someone sees you clearly and still decides to walk away, you know you will be okay. Your love for yourself doesn't disappear because theirs did. This internal safety is what makes truly deep connection possible. The kind where you don't need the other person to say the right thing at every moment because you're already saying it to yourself. The fourth transformation is in your boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They are not punishments. They are the natural expression of a person who has decided their own needs matter. When you love yourself, protecting your time, energy, and emotional well-being becomes natural, not aggressive, not defensive, just clear. You say no when you mean no, not because you've practiced assertiveness techniques, but because your yes means something. You stop tolerating behavior that diminishes you, not because you've decided to be rigid, but because you've decided to be honest. And honesty in relationships is the only real foundation. Perhaps the deepest gift self-love brings to your relationships is this: you stop needing them to complete you. You show up not as someone with a void that requires filling, but as someone with a life that has room for shared experience. This shifts every dynamic, from romantic partnerships to friendships to family relationships to professional connections, from a transaction into a genuine, generous exchange. You become someone who gives from fullness rather than fear. And in doing so, you finally receive the kind of love that's actually real, not earned, not performed, not dependent on you staying exactly who the other person needs you to be, but freely given to the person you actually are. Why self-love is the foundation of real, lasting success. The conventional American success story goes something like this: work hard enough, achieve enough, prove yourself to enough people, and eventually you'll feel worthy of the life you've built. It's a lie. And it's a lie that is quietly ruining a lot of lives that look very successful from the outside. Here's the truth that decades of psychology research has confirmed. The path to genuine, sustainable success runs through self-love, not toward it. Success doesn't create self-worth. Self-worth creates success. The sequence matters enormously. When you don't love yourself, achievement becomes a drug. You chase outcomes not because you genuinely want them, but because you believe each new one will finally be the one that makes you feel okay. It never is. Because the moment you arrive at a goal, the part of you that was looking for validation realizes the goal was never actually about the goal. It was about earning the right to feel worthy. And since no external achievement can create that feeling, the only solution the validation-seeking mind knows is to set a higher goal. This is the treadmill, and it is exhausting in ways that can't be seen on a LinkedIn profile. There's also the quieter, more insidious version: self-sabotage. When you genuinely don't believe you deserve good things, your unconscious mind becomes extraordinarily creative in finding ways to prevent them. You procrastinate on the application because what if you actually got in? You create conflict right when the relationship is getting good because closeness feels too vulnerable. You disappear just as your business is about to break through. These aren't accidents of circumstance. They are the predictable behavior of a mind operating on the belief that success belongs to other people. Self-love dismantles both of these patterns by changing the fundamental motivation for action. When you love yourself, you pursue goals not to prove your worth, but to express it. The difference in daily experience is enormous. Work done from a place of genuine interest and self-respect feels different than work done from a place of desperate necessity. Risks taken from curiosity and confidence feel different than risks avoided from fear of exposure. The former is sustainable, the latter burns out. Self-love also creates what psychologists call an internal locus of control, the conviction that your outcomes are shaped significantly by your own choices, effort, and perspective rather than by forces entirely outside yourself. This mindset is one of the most consistent predictors of achievement across cultures, professions, and life circumstances. People who believe they are agents in their own story, rather than subjects of it, consistently outperform those who don't. When you love yourself, you are also far more capable of receiving feedback, one of the most essential skills for growth in any domain. People who lack self-love experience criticism as a threat because their sense of worth feels immediately implicated. They either collapse into agreement or defend themselves aggressively, neither of which is particularly useful for actually improving. But when your worth isn't on the line every time someone offers a correction, you can hear it clearly, consider it honestly, and use it, or set it aside, with genuine discernment. Self-love also transforms how you handle failure, not by eliminating the sting, but by preventing that sting from becoming a verdict. A person who loves themselves can look at a failure, extract everything useful from it, acknowledge the grief of it honestly, and then return to the work, not because they're superhuman, but because their identity is not contained in the outcome. They failed. They are not a failure. That distinction, held consistently over time, is the difference between a person who gives up and a person who eventually breaks through. The self-love success formula is ultimately simple, even if it is not easy. Build your worth on the inside, and your actions on the outside will begin to reflect it. Not because positive thinking is magic, but because when you genuinely believe you deserve good things and are capable of creating them, you make different choices, consistently, over time, and those choices compound. Loving yourself when everything is falling apart. Anyone can practice self-love on a good day. The real test, the test that determines whether what you're building is surface-level sentiment or genuine, unshakable foundation, is what happens to your relationship with yourself when things go badly wrong. And they will. Not as a pessimistic prediction, but as an honest acknowledgement of what it means to be alive. Loss is not optional. Failure is not avoidable. Grief, disappointment, illness, rejection, and the 1,000 ordinary setbacks of a full human life, these are not exceptions to the experience of living. They are constitutive of it. So the question is never whether hard things will come. The question is, who will you be to yourself when they do? For most people, the arrival of crisis triggers a predictable and devastating shift. The self-compassion they've been practicing disappears exactly when it's needed most, replaced by the harshest version of their inner critic. Why did I let this happen? What's wrong with me? I should have seen this coming. Other people handle this better. I'm falling apart. This is conditional self-love. And conditional self-love is not love. It is approval on a curve, available when you meet the standard, withdrawn when you don't, which is, of course, exactly what most of us received in childhood. No wonder it feels normal. Genuine self-love is unconditional. It means meeting yourself with the same fundamental warmth and compassion when you are failing, hurting, and frightened as when you are succeeding, strong, and certain. Not because you're performing positivity, not because you're pretending the pain isn't real, but because your worth, your fundamental human worth, is not subject to revision based on what just happened. The storms of life also have a particular cruelty. They tend to activate exactly the wounds we haven't finished healing. A job loss doesn't just mean a job loss. For someone who learned in childhood that love was contingent on performance, it can feel like a confirmation of everything they feared was true about themselves, that they were never really good enough, that success was always borrowed time, that people will leave now. A relationship ending doesn't just mean grief. For someone whose early attachment was unreliable, it can crash directly into the oldest fear, that they are, at some fundamental level, unlovable. Understanding this mechanism, the way present crisis can become a portal into old wounds, is not just psychologically interesting, it is practically life-saving. Because when you know that the devastation you're feeling in this moment is partly being amplified by wounds from 20 years ago, you can respond to it with appropriate compassion rather than treating it as fresh proof of your inadequacy. Here is what caring for yourself during a storm actually looks like. It means accepting that you're in pain, not minimizing it, not performing resilience, not rushing through the grieving. Whatever happened, it hurt. That is allowed. The pain is not a measure of your weakness. It is a measure of your humanity. It means asking what you actually need, not what you think you should need or what you'd tell a friend to need, but what your specific, real self needs in this specific, real moment. Sometimes it's rest, sometimes it's movement, sometimes it's honest company, and sometimes it's honest solitude. Self-love means developing the capacity to listen for the answer rather than overriding it with obligation or numbness. It means protecting your energy without guilt. During recovery, from loss, from failure, from trauma, you have less reserve than usual. That is not a character flaw. It is physiologically true. Self-love during a storm means acknowledging that you cannot carry what you normally carry right now and adjusting accordingly. Saying no, asking for help, letting some things wait. It means monitoring the story you're telling. The narrative you construct around your struggle has an enormous impact on your capacity to move through it. I'm a person going through something very difficult, and I'm a person who always ruins everything, are not the same story, even when the facts they're built on are identical. One story includes your humanity, the other renders a verdict on your worth. Self-love means insisting on the former. It means getting professional. Support when the weight is beyond what you can carry alone. This is not weakness. This is the same intelligence that drives you to see a doctor for a broken bone. Mental and emotional injury is injury. Seeking skilled help to heal it is not a concession of defeat. It is one of the highest acts of self-love available. Every storm you navigate with genuine self-compassion does something that nothing else can. It proves to you, at the level of lived experience, that you can survive your own life, that you can go through the fire and come out the other side without having abandoned yourself, that you are, in fact, your own most reliable guardian. That proof compounds. Each storm you move through with self-love makes the next one slightly less terrifying. Not because the storms get smaller, but because your trust in your own capacity to meet them grows larger. Advanced practices for people ready to go. Deeper. What you've built so far is the foundation. Now let's talk about construction. For people ready to move beyond the basics of self-love and into genuine, lasting transformation, the kind that changes not just how you feel but who you are, There are several advanced practices worth understanding. Shadow work. Everyone has a shadow, the collection of personality traits, desires, emotions, and impulses that were deemed unacceptable early in life and therefore pushed underground. Carl Jung, who named this concept, understood that what you reject in yourself doesn't disappear. It operates in the unconscious, driving behavior in ways you can't predict or control. You can identify your shadow partly by noticing what triggers you most intensely in other people. The qualities that reliably enrage, disgust, or destabilize you in others are often direct mirrors of the qualities you've most fiercely rejected in yourself. If arrogance in others sends you through the roof, you may be sitting on a deeply suppressed need to be seen and valued. If neediness in others makes you profoundly uncomfortable, you may have learned long ago that having needs was dangerous. Shadow work doesn't mean becoming arrogant or needy. It means acknowledging these parts of yourself with enough honesty and compassion that they can be integrated rather than disowned. Integrated shadows don't control you. Disowned ones do. Inner reparenting. Many of the wounds that drive self-rejection are wounds of the child, unmet needs for safety, validation, consistency, and unconditional love. As an adult, you have a capacity the child didn't. You can choose to provide these things for yourself. Inner reparenting means developing internal voices that play the roles your adult self needs. A nurturing voice that offers comfort when you're hurting. A wise voice that offers perspective when you're lost. A protective voice that advocates for you when others treat you poorly. This isn't performance. With practice, these voices become real. They become the background music of your inner life, gradually replacing the harsh, critical chorus you inherited. Embodiment, self-love that lives only in your mind is incomplete. Your body has its own relationship with self-worth, one that has been shaped by years of tension, posture, bracing, and held emotion. Notice right now how you're holding your body. Are your shoulders rolled forward? Is your jaw clenched? Is your chest slightly collapsed? These are not just postural habits. They are physical expressions of your relationship with yourself, a body that has learned to make itself smaller, to prepare for impact, to take up less space. Begin practicing embodiment. Carry yourself as if you matter. Stand as if the space you occupy is yours by right. Make eye contact as if what you're about to say deserves to be heard. Your body language doesn't just reflect your self-worth, it actively creates it. The neuroscience here is clear and remarkable. Holding your body in positions associated with confidence measurably changes your hormonal chemistry within minutes. Visualization and mental rehearsal. Your brain processes vividly imagined experience through many of the same neural pathways as real experience. This means you can literally practice being your most confident, most loved, most authentic self in your mind. And your nervous system will treat it as genuine training. Spend time each day, even just 5 minutes, imagining yourself moving through challenging situations with grace, speaking your truth clearly, handling setbacks without collapsing, receiving love without deflecting it. The more sensory detail you include, the more effective the rehearsal. Feel the steadiness in your body. Hear the clarity in your own voice. Let it be real. Loving kindness practice. Drawn from Buddhist contemplative tradition and now backed by substantial neuroscience, loving kindness practice involves actively sending yourself genuine goodwill. Place your hand on your heart. Say, with as much sincerity as you can muster, "May I be happy, may I be safe, may I be at peace, may I live with ease." The first time you try this, you may feel nothing, or you may feel resistance, a deep reflexive skepticism about whether you deserve these wishes. That resistance is information. It's telling you exactly how far you've traveled from your own side. Keep practicing. The neuroscience shows that consistent loving-kindness practice measurably increases activity in brain regions associated with positive emotion, social connection, and emotional resilience. It is, quite literally, one of the most powerful things you can do for your brain. These advanced practices are not quick fixes. They are long-game investments in a version of yourself that most people never get to meet, because most people stop at the surface level of self-improvement without ever touching the architecture underneath. The truth about self-love in romantic relationships: no arena more reliably reveals the state of your self-love than romantic relationships. This is where it gets tested most severely, because nowhere else does vulnerability run so high, old wounds surface so predictably, and the temptation to abandon yourself for connection feels so overwhelming. Most people enter romantic relationships from a place of deficit rather than abundance. They come looking for someone to provide what they haven't been able to give themselves: consistent reassurance that they are lovable, worthy, and enough. This need isn't wrong. It's human. But when it becomes the foundation of why you're in the relationship, it creates a structure that is inherently unstable, because no other person can be a permanent, reliable substitute for your own self-love. They can supplement it, they can deepen it, they can reflect it back to you in beautiful ways, but they cannot create it. And when you need them to, you place an impossible burden on both of them and the relationship. When you approach romantic connection from a foundation of genuine self-love, the entire dynamic changes. You are selective in ways that actually serve you, not from arrogance, but from clarity. You know what you value, what you need, and what you will not accept. This clarity doesn't make you rigid, it makes you honest. And honesty at the beginning of a relationship is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself and someone else. You show up as yourself from early on, with your quirks, your opinions, your needs, your history, not as a performance of who you think they want, but as the actual person you are. This is terrifying to many people. It feels like handing someone a list of reasons to reject you. But the alternative, attracting someone who falls for a version of you that doesn't exist, creates a relationship that requires you to keep performing indefinitely. That is not love. That is theater. You are capable of genuine intimacy, the kind that requires revealing what is actually true about you, not just the appealing parts. Intimacy and performance cannot coexist. And self-love is what makes intimacy possible, because it gives you the internal security to be seen without needing to control what the other person does with what they see. You maintain yourself inside the relationship. Your friendships, your interests, your goals, your sense of who you are independent of this partnership, these don't evaporate in the heat of new love. This is not a failure of commitment. It is a prerequisite for sustainable love. The person your partner fell in love with deserves to continue existing. Your ongoing individuality is not a threat to the relationship. It is what keeps it alive. And when the relationship faces difficulty, as all genuine, lasting relationships inevitably do, you can engage with the conflict rather than flee from it or be destroyed by it. You can hear difficult feedback without treating it as a verdict on your worth. You can express difficult truths without treating your partner's reaction as the final word on whether you're allowed to have them. You can work through hard things because your security doesn't depend on everything being resolved immediately. Perhaps most importantly, self-love gives you the capacity to end relationships that are genuinely incompatible or harmful. Not impulsively, not at the first sign of difficulty, but when the honest assessment is that this relationship is not a place where either of you can grow into your best selves. Choosing to leave is sometimes the highest act of self-love, And it requires a degree of trust in yourself. Trust that you will be okay on the other side. Trust that you are not abandoning yourself to the fear of being alone, that only genuine self-love can provide. Living as your most authentic self, the radical act of being real. In America, we talk a great deal about authenticity. It appears in brand slogans, leadership seminars, and the captions of carefully filtered Instagram posts that have taken 45 minutes to compose. Most of what passes for authenticity in public life is not authenticity. It is curated vulnerability, the performance of being real, designed to produce a particular effect. It is authentic content without authentic living. Real authenticity is quieter, messier, and far more demanding. It is the daily choice to honor who you actually are, rather than who you've calculated you should appear to be. And it is, at its core, an act of profound self-love. Carl Jung described the persona, the mask we construct for public life, as a necessary social tool, but a dangerous one when we forget we're wearing it. When the persona becomes the primary identity, the authentic self gets buried underneath. And a person living primarily through their persona is, in a very real sense, living someone else's life. The signs of persona-driven living are everywhere. The career chosen for its status rather than its fit. The relationship maintained for its optics rather than its substance. The opinions expressed not because you hold them, but because they are safe. The emotions suppressed because they don't match the image. The needs denied because acknowledging them feels like weakness. This performance is exhausting in a way that's hard to name because it never stops. There is no break from managing your image when your image is your identity. Authentic living begins with the willingness to investigate who you actually are, beneath the accumulation of roles, expectations, and survival strategies you've been wearing. Some useful questions to sit with honestly. What do I genuinely enjoy, separate from what I've been told I should enjoy? What are my actual values, the ones that guide my behavior when nobody's watching, as opposed to the ones I endorse publicly? What kind of life would I build if I were certain that the people I love would still love me regardless of what I chose? The answers to these questions may be uncomfortable. They may reveal that you've been living at some distance from yourself, that the career, the relationships, the daily structure you've built are more shaped by fear of judgment than by genuine desire. That recognition can be disorienting, even grief-inducing, but it is also liberating, because once you can see the gap between who you are performing and who you actually are, you can begin, deliberately and compassionately, to close it. Authentic expression is not recklessness. It doesn't mean saying everything you think to everyone who will listen or abandoning your responsibilities because they weren't your first choice. It means finding honest ways to let your actual self be present in your relationships, your work, your creative life, and your daily choices. It means sharing a genuine opinion in a conversation rather than mirroring the room. It means pursuing the project that genuinely excites you alongside the one that pays the bills. It means letting people see you struggle rather than only showing them the version of you that has arrived. It means living in a way where, if you could see yourself from the outside, you would recognize the person you're watching. There is a paradox at the heart of authenticity that is worth naming. The more genuinely yourself you are willing to be, the more deeply connected you become to others. This seems to contradict the fear that keeps most people performing, the fear that if people saw the real you, they would leave. In reality, it is the performance that creates isolation because you can never be truly known through a mask. And genuine belonging requires being genuinely known. When you live authentically, some people will be uncomfortable. Some will move away. This will hurt. But the connections that remain, and the new ones that form around your genuine self, will be of a quality that no performed version of you could ever have attracted. You will be loved for something real, and that love will feel different from the approval you've been collecting. It will feel like home. The compound effect. What self-love looks like. A decade from now, here is something that is easy to miss when you're in the early stages of this work, when change feels slow and effort feels large. Self-love compounds, like interest in a savings account that begins modestly and grows into something transformative over time. Small, consistent acts of self-compassion, self-honesty, and self-respect accumulate across months and years into a fundamentally different life. Most people underestimate this because they're measuring the wrong things. They practice self-compassion for 3 weeks and don't feel dramatically different, so they conclude it isn't working. But the brain doesn't operate on a 3-week timeline. The neural pathways being built are invisible, the seeds being planted are underground. The foundation being laid is below the surface. Here is what the research consistently shows about people who maintain genuine self-love practices over time. Decision-making improves. When you're not clouded by the chronic anxiety of self-doubt or the desperate urgency of needing approval, you think more clearly. You evaluate options with greater accuracy. You trust your instincts because you've developed enough self-knowledge to understand what your instincts are actually tracking. Better decisions compound over years into a life shaped by genuine wisdom rather than fear. Relationships improve. As your self-worth grows more solid, your tolerance for dynamics that diminish you naturally decreases. Toxic relationships fall away, not through dramatic confrontation, but through the simple reality that you're no longer available to them. Healthier relationships deepen and multiply. The social world you inhabit 5 years from now can look almost unrecognizable from where you're standing today. Career and creative expression expand. When you stop needing your work to prove your worth, you can finally choose work that expresses it. The creative projects you've been postponing until you feel ready enough. The business you've been too afraid to start. The leadership role you've been convinced you weren't qualified for. Self-love creates the internal safety to pursue what you genuinely want to build, and the resilience to keep going when the first version of it fails, as first versions tend to do. Health improves. This is not about aesthetics. It's about the simple biological fact that a person who values themselves takes better care of themselves. They sleep. They move. They eat in ways that support the body, rather than punish it or numb it. They seek medical care when something is wrong, rather than ignoring it because attending to their own needs feels like an imposition. The compound health benefits of consistent self-care over a decade are enormous. Financial outcomes improve. Self-love changes your relationship with money in ways that aren't immediately obvious. It reduces the compulsive spending that often masks emotional unmet needs. It increases your willingness to negotiate for fair compensation because you believe you're worth it. It shifts your relationship to risk. You become willing to invest in your own skills and ventures because you trust yourself to deliver. The financial compound effect of these shifts over 10 years is significant. And then there is the effect that extends beyond your individual life, the generational compound effect. The patterns of self-rejection that most adults carry were learned from people who were also carrying them, received from their own parents, who received them from theirs. These patterns don't just affect individuals, they run through families, through communities, through generations. When you do the work of learning to love yourself genuinely, when you heal the wound that was passed to you and refuse to pass it to the next generation, you break a chain. Your children, if you have them, grow up watching someone practice honest self-compassion. Your younger siblings, your friends, your colleagues, observe what it looks like to treat yourself with genuine respect and dignity. That modeling is among the most powerful forces for change available to a human being. Your healing is not just for you. It is for everyone in your orbit who hasn't yet learned that this is possible. Start today. Not when you feel ready. You will never feel perfectly ready because self-love doesn't begin at the destination. It begins with the first step taken in the right direction. Start with one act of self-compassion in the next hour. One honest thought offered to yourself with kindness rather than criticism. One small decision made from your own values rather than someone else's approval. That is the seed. And seeds, tended with consistency, become forests. Becoming your own greatest love story. You've arrived at the final chapter, but nothing is ending here. Everything is beginning. Let's be honest about what this work actually requires. It requires showing up for yourself with the same dedication you've been showing up for other people your entire life. It requires choosing your own truth over other people's comfort, not cruelly, but firmly and repeatedly, and with the knowledge that your authenticity ultimately serves everyone around you more than your performance ever could. It requires deciding, again and again, in ordinary moments and in extraordinary ones, that you are worth the effort of being known, loved, and protected by the one person who will be with you every moment of your existence, yourself. Because here is the deepest truth this book has been building toward. Everyone else in your life will at some point be unavailable, not because they don't love you, because they are human. Distracted by their own battles, limited by their own capacity, unable to be present in precisely the way you need them, in precisely the moment you need it. Your partner will be asleep when you're awake at 3 a.m. with fear. Your best friend will be in their own crisis the week yours hits hardest. Your parents, in the fullness of time, will not be here. Only one person will always, without exception, be present for every moment of your experience. That person is you. And the quality of the relationship between you and yourself, the kindness, the honesty, the reliability, the courage to stand by yourself even when standing by yourself is uncomfortable, that relationship is the ground from which everything else grows. This is what it means to love yourself more than anyone. Not more than you love others, more than you depend on others to love you, more than you sacrifice yourself to earn love from others, more than you wait for someone else to finally give you permission to believe you are enough. You are enough. Not as a slogan, as a biological reality, as a fact of your existence that does not fluctuate based on your productivity, your weight, your relationship status, your bank account, your children's choices, your professional achievements, or what anyone in any room thinks of you on any given day. You are a human being. And human beings, simply by existing, carry worth that cannot be earned and cannot be taken away. The journey of self-love is not a journey toward that truth. It is the journey of gradually, persistently, courageously remembering what was always already true and building a life that reflects it. Your most loved self is not a future version of you who has everything figured out. Your most loved self is the person who, right now, in this moment, is willing to try. That's enough. That has always been enough. Now go live like it.